So one of the benefits that PhotonAssay has to offer is not need to pulverise your sample, and also the additional mass, which, as we mentioned, will help with not under-reporting your gold grade, especially if you may not even be aware of the extent of the coarse gold that you've got in your samples.
The classic undersampling, if you like to call it that, really is, starting from the primary sample, whether it be our RC, diamond, or even a face sampling if it's a working operation, going on to that process and then ending up with a 30 to 50 gram fire assay, and that final assay aliquot having no bearing on that 30, 40 kilo RC sample or 7, 8, 9 kilo, whatever it is.
We know the PhotonAssay works well on coarse gold, but overall in the industry, what are some of the challenges and opportunities that coarse gold offers in a mine site setting?
What does coarse gold mean? Explain to a simple physicist.
Sure. Well, it's gold that ultimately materially will have an effect on the sampling and the assaying process.
And is coarse the same as gravity recoverable, or are they different concepts?
They're different concepts, but they're actually quite aligned. If we nominally say gravity recoverable gold is gold that when it is liberated after some pulverising grinding process, that it can be recovered by gravity. Now that might be through a centrifugal concentrator, it might be through a shaking cable, or even a simple sluice that prospectors use. If we've got coarse gold in the project, in our mineralisation, we've probably almost certainly got some gravity recoverable gold. If we've got gravity recoverable gold, we might not have a large amount of coarse gold.
And would every deposit have elements of coarse gold in them, or is it uncommon, or somewhere in between?
Pretty much every deposit will have coarse gold, but it's the proportion of coarse gold that's important. If you've just got a couple of percent and it's not particularly coarse, you may not have no problem at all. You may go to the Bendigo and Ballarats of this world, where your coarse gold is probably 75–80% of what you've got a big issue, and you need to deal with it accordingly.
Are there benefits to having that coarse gold, or is it just a problem?
Probably more challenging, really. In that where you've got coarse gold, you'll often have a high nugget. We've spoken about the nugget effect before, which obviously can affect the block modelling and the quality of your block model. And above all, we've got the sampling challenge, because if you're trying to collect a sample, process it, and analyze it, and you've got the coarse gold present, in your 1 meter of RC or diamond core, you may capture a few of these particles, but if by the time you get down to a 30 gram fire assay, you've not caught any of those particles, then you're going to understate the gold in that. Hence the conversation around PhotonAssay, because that allows you then to have, multiples of 400 or 500 grams for assay, which is then going to give you a higher probability of collecting these coarse gold particles.
Do you find that sites that do have a level of coarse gold, but they wouldn't describe themselves as a coarse gold deposit, maybe it's 20% or it's a particular domain, do you find that they'll have a separate sampling protocol for that coarse section, or would you say that most of the time it's the same?
I always try to optimize for the most difficult sampling scenario, making the assumption that it trumps everything else and is probably most dominant, because if you don't sample it properly, you're undercalling the key part of the mineralization that gives you it's the old cream on the milk story. You got the milk, but in fact it's that cream that you really want to sample nicely and resolve, because it may well be the number that gives you the best profit.
What are some of the problems that you typically find around their sampling of those areas?
The classic undersampling, if you like to call it that, really is, starting from the primary sample, whether it be our RC, diamond, or even a face sampling if it's a working operation, going on to that process and then ending up with a 30 to 50 gram fire assay, and that final assay aliquot having no bearing on that 30, 40 kilo RC sample or 7, 8, 9 kilo, whatever it is.
You've talked about the challenge of getting down to that 30 gram or 50 grammer, but I mean, if you pulverise, doesn't that fix everything?
At the theoretical end, remember, where you've got lots of fine gold, pulverising solves all your problems, because it just pulverises everything. The gold is evenly distributed in your pulp. You take a cut using a riffle splitter to get a little 30 gram fire assay, and off you go. And that represents that, which represents that, and that represents the area of influence of the drill hole, and life is all good. The problem is that the pulverising of coarse gold particles is reasonably inefficient. And I was fortunate enough, sort of 30 odd years ago, when I was doing my postdoc, actually to be able to do some experimental work on this. And we set up a whole series of samples based on quartz and put gold grains in them so that we could pulverise for a minute, have a look at the gold, pulverise for a bit longer, and actually look at how these grains react. And the problem is some of these grains, they start to get rounded as they pulverise, and then they start to actually break down and actually go into sort of, for want of a better word, a sausage shape, and then slowly over time.
Think of a hand-rolled cigar.
Yeah, well, exactly, precisely right. Think of a hand-rolled cigar and pretend it's, you know, a couple of mil long and a gold particle. Yes, of course, some of the gold will pulverise and, you know, and will distribute within the pulp, but we still end up with these potential lumps of gold,
And then presumably transferring that onto the next sample that comes through.
Exactly right. Or if you recognise that that's the case, number one, you're losing gold, so of course you've effectively got a preparation error. And then, you know, even if you do recognise it, you ask the lab to run 2 or 3 barren flushes before you do the next sum, then of course, you know, turnaround time, just aggro, cost.
We had that for a feasibility study where they recognised they had areas of coarse gold within their broader deposit, but to try and alleviate some of that problem when we were doing the test work, because yeah, if you don't want carryover or anything in it, they were putting a blank wash between every single sample, and yeah, you could actually see the gold popping up in those blanks between samples, which just highlights that. And we still had carryover.
Because we're non-destructive, we can reassay the same material more than once. So we'll get a sample, we'll split it out as a crushed product into jars, measure it. I mean, Naomi, you and I were discussing this the other day. The relative improvement you get from pulping is, I'm always disappointed by it. You know, you might start with, say, a 15% CV, and it might go to 12%. And it's not that by pulverising it, you've completely disseminated your gold, and your sampling's perfect.
Whereas if you can just avoid the pulverising process altogether, then you're also eliminating all the other errors that come in with the pulverising. So one of the benefits that PhotonAssay has to offer is not needing to pulverise your sample, and then also the additional mass, which, as we mentioned, will help with not underreporting your gold grade, especially if you may not even be aware of the extent of the coarse gold that you've got in your samples. James, do you want to comment on how PhotonAssay deals with coarse gold and how it can be beneficial?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, one of the nice things about the method is we're working with really high energy X-rays, and that just makes them very penetrating. So they actually don't see whether the material in the jar is a powder or a rock chips, or even a solid lump of rock. They just go straight through. As a method, we'll see those gold atoms wherever they are in the jar, and whether they're present as a gold nugget or whether they're disseminated, the method really doesn't care. We actually make 4 separate measurements. So when the jar goes in, we have detectors above and below, and they each make an independent measurement of the gold. We run the samples round twice, and so that gives us another 2 measurements. And we actually look at the consistency of those measurements, and if they differ, that indicates that the gold inside the jar is not uniformly distributed. It tells us we've got gold particles in there. And we flag that, you know, back to the labs or back to the end users. One of the things that we've always striven to do with PhotonAssay is give more than just a grade. You know, if we feel the material is particularly heterogeneous, we want to flag it. If there's deleterious or interfering elements that we can detect, you know, is actually providing that indication back. If you've got duplicates, calculating uncertainties or CVs on those duplicates and reporting that information, you know, there's a lot more than we can give than just grade.
There is more that we can do now that will contribute to the geometallurgical model.
But it sounds like from a geometallurgical perspective, that het flag would also potentially be useful for more disseminated gold deposits as well, because you're not expecting to see heterogeneous gold, and so it could be used as a flag for potentially some changes that are going on.
If you don't think you've got any coarse gold, and then all of a sudden 20 or 30% of your PhotonAssay jars come back with the het flag waving, well, it's worth thinking about it.
Look, it's probably worth noting, I mean, from a physics perspective, the way the instrument works, I mean, gold is gold is gold. You know, we'll do a great job on coarse gold, but we're quite happy to measure disseminated gold. You know, we've measured solutions, which is, I guess, the ultimate disseminated gold. Yeah, the method doesn't care. It'll still tell you the gold content.